In today's video, we're going to actually use the quadratic formula to solve quadratic equations. In our previous video, we just identified A, B, and C and set up the quadratic formula, but today we're going to actually do the calculations and find our solutions. Alright, so we are going to solve x squared minus 4x minus 5 equals 0. So we're going to find the values for x that when you substitute them in would make this equation true. First thing we do is identify what A, B, and C are. And we practiced that before. So A is the number in front of x squared. So that's 1. B is the coefficient of the x. So that's negative 4 in this problem. And C is the constant, the number without the variable. So that is negative 5. When we substitute in the numbers for the quadratic formula, which I did list down here at the bottom, then we would come up with this x equals negative of negative 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 5 all over 2 times 1. So I already substituted everything in for you. Alright, so to do our calculations, the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to calculate this stuff underneath of the square root. We're not going to use the square root symbol. We're just going to plug in the numbers that are there underneath of it. So no square root symbol yet. Okay, so in my calculator, I am going to put in just exactly what I circled. Negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 5. I'm not putting in the square root symbol yet. Parenthesis, negative 4 parenthesis squared, then minus 4 parenthesis 1, and then end your parenthesis and a new one for negative 5. Okay, so that was the stuff underneath the square root. It's actually called the discriminant, which you'll talk about in Algebra 2. Alright, so I found that that value was 36, so I'm going to go plug it back in. Okay, so I found it was 36, so I have x equals negative of negative 4 plus or minus, we found this was 36 under the square root. Notice I haven't done the square root yet, so I left it all over 2 times 1. Alright, in my next step, I'm going to take care of everything that wasn't under the square root. So I've got these extra parentheses I need to get rid of. So x equals, so we have negative of negative 4. So what is a negative negative 4? Well, that becomes positive 4. So now I'm getting rid of those parentheses. Plus or minus the square root of 36 all over, and then there's my next set of parentheses that I want to get rid of. So 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, so my first step, I got rid of what was under the square root. I figured out what all that was. I got rid of those parentheses. In the second step, I got rid of all the parentheses outside. In my next step, my third step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this plus and minus sign and I'm going to split it up, because I need to show what that means is I need to show I'm adding 4 and square root of 36 and then dividing by 2, and I need to separate it with the 4 minus square root of 36 and divide that by 2. Okay, so I'm going to do those two problems to get those two different answers. Now I do need to be careful on my calculator. I need to make sure that I do 4 plus square root of 36 and I make sure I hit enter before I divide by 2. And same thing when I do the subtraction. You must hit enter for the numerator before you can show you're dividing by 2. Okay, so I'm going to do 4 plus square root of 36. Okay, and I'm going to hit enter, and then I need to divide that by 2. So my first answer comes out to 5. But I had 4 minus square root of 36 as well. So 4 minus square root of 36, I get that by hitting enter, and then I have to divide that by 2 as well. So I find my two answers were 5 and negative 1. So here I'm writing my answers. They were 5 and -1. And I got two answers, just like when we solved by graphing and you saw you had two x-intercepts. When you solved by factoring, you had two different parentheses, you set them both equal to 0, and when you solved by taking the square root of both sides, you put a positive and a negative answer. So most of the time you had two different answers. All right, so let's try this second example. So we're going to solve -4x squared minus 12x minus 9 equals 0. So we're trying to find the numbers that we could plug in for x to make this equation true. So first thing, identify a, b, and c. So a is -4. It's the coefficient in front of x squared. B is -12. It's the number in front of the x. And c is -9 because it is the constant. Okay, so it looks like my quadratic formula isn't completely filled in for me, so we have to practice filling some of it in. So we have the x equals, and then a negative, and then the b is missing. So b was -12, so let's plug that in. It already has the plus or minus in the square root, but then the b here that's being squared, that b is missing again. So -12 was the b. I'm just substituting it in. It looks like I already have the -4 a and c. Oh, looks like the a and the c are missing the negative signs. Okay, a was -4 and c was -9, and then all over 2 times whatever the a was, a is -4. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to simplify what's underneath the square root first. So I circle this, and so my calculator and all those things that had parentheses still need to have parentheses. And I'm going to type all of that in to my calculator. All right, so -12 in parentheses squared. Make sure the squared's outside the parentheses. -4 parenthesis, and then it was -4, and then it was -9. So it looks like we got 0. All right, let's go back. Okay, so x equals, keep these outside parentheses, keep all this, plus or minus. The only thing I did was found that it was the square root of 0 now. All over 2 times -4. In my next step, I like to get rid of those extra parentheses. So x equals, so I have a negative times -12. So that's +12 plus or minus the square root of 0 all over 2 times -4 is -8. All right, step 3, I like to separate it. I'm showing that I'm adding first, and then I'm subtracting second. Okay, so I'm showing that I'm adding first, and I'm subtracting second. Okay, and remember, in my calculator, I need to make sure that I hit enter after I add or subtract at the top before I hit divide by -8. So I have 12 plus the square root of 0. I have to hit enter before I can divide by -8. All right, so I found my first answer was -1.5. All right, when I go to do the next one, 12 minus square root of 0, and then divide by -8. And notice I got -1.5 again. So I could write x equals -1.5 again, but those are really the same answer, so there's really no reason to write it a second time. You only have one answer this time, and that can happen. Or we could have two answers, we could have one answer, and even we had some problems before where we had no answers. All right, let's try example 3. This is our last one. So again, find a, b, and c. So a equals, so what's in front of x squared? A equals -1. There's a -1 in front of there. B is the term, or the coefficient of the x term, so b is 6. And c is the constant one without, so it is -4. All right, this time We don't have a lot of our formula filled out, so we're going to have to fill it out. So x equals, then we have a negative, so that's already written for us. Okay, we already had that, but then we have a b. So b was 6, plus or minus the square root of the thing that was squared was the b, so I put it in there. Minus 4 times the a comes next, that was negative 1, and the c is negative 4, all over 2 times the a is negative 1. Okay, so we're going to do what's underneath the square root first. So I need to figure out what 6 squared, make sure it's in parentheses, minus 4 times negative 1 times negative 4 is. So it's 20. So x equals negative parentheses 6 plus or minus the square root of, and we came up with 20 for all of that. All over, still have 2 times negative 1 in the denominator. Okay, so now I'm going to get rid of those other parentheses. So x equals negative of 6 is just negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 20 over 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. All right, I'm going to separate them. So negative 6 plus square root of 20 divided by negative 2. And x equals negative 6 minus square root of 20 divided by negative 2. And we're going to see what our answers are. Okay, so it looks like my first answer, right, it looks like I have a decimal here, is going to be 0.76. So x equals 0.76 for my first answer. And I'll go back and I'll do the same thing, but I have to do subtraction. Make sure you hit enter. Then you can divide by the denominator, which was negative 2. So I got another decimal, so it looks like I have 5.2, and I'm going to round it to 4 because the number after the 3 was 5 or bigger, it was 6, so 5.24. And those are my two answers. So if we were to plug those back in for the x's, one at a time, you will get 0 for both.